Does he bluff, Tony?
Here's a book called War Scare. It's about 1983. My dear departed friend, Dr. Dr. Pry wrote it. The Russians, at the tactical level, almost went to war with us based on the perception. The perception. They perceived us as about to strike them, and they were ready to launch on us, Judge. 1983. So Putin is from that era, as am I. We all remember these things directly. We were there. And I know for a fact that based on everything that's in this book, I highly recommend it. I don't get anything out of it. And Peter's dead, so Peter's estate may get something. This goes through in great detail the who shot John, so to speak, right, of what almost happened. So the Russians are not bluffing. Well, I don't believe they would necessarily go with first use. They would use. I mean, they thought we were going to strike them during something called Operation Able Archer, in I think it was October, November, somewhere in there of '83. I was a very young lieutenant at the time, just saying. And so, no, I don't think he's bluffing at all. He's saying, look at our doctrine. Look at look what we can do. That's a very rational statement. That's not someone trying to create conditions for provocation. It's just saying, we have established a methodology and policy for use. So, by the way, I couldn't tell you what our policy is at this point, and I served a long time in our military, and I have no idea what our policy is.
All right, let me ask you some precise questions.
Yeah.
Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter tell me, and the public, that there is an assembly point. There are two assembly points, one in Romania, one in Poland, where a lot of our gear comes and then is distributed, put together, assembled, shipped out, maintained, repaired when it's damaged, sent down to Ukraine. There are hundreds of NATO officers there, including hundreds of Americans.
Yes.
Are those points fair game for Putin if the equipment being assembled and maintained there is eventually being used to attack inside Russia?
I think the Russians will think so, yes. There's been a gentleman's agreement, kind of both sides have adhered to it, kind of, that whatever happens in Ukraine stays in Ukraine, so, to use the Vegas metaphor. And everything has been incidental to that region or just outside of it. There's been some incursions into other space, but nothing significant. But yeah, the moment you open the door as a policy issue, which you pointed out correctly, the United States and all these other NATO nations have opened it up. All four, except for the Italians, Judge. Did you notice the Italians? They like pizza and living, so they're not on board with all this expansion of the effort.
Right.
And well, they are. I mean, you're Italian. Like, come on, I'm saying this with all due love.
I'm smiling because of all the cultural implications of what you said, but Prime Minister Meloni has said she's not on board with it. I don't know what Italian equipment is there, but she doesn't want to get involved, and she doesn't want Russian military attacking Italian soldiers. Does Joe Biden want Russian military attacking Americans? Are they there in Poland and Romania? And we know some are on the ground in Ukraine out of uniform as a tripwire, Lieutenant Colonel Shaffer.
Well, this is the issue. So I posted on this the other day on X. NATO was created as a response to the Berlin air crisis. There was a legitimate reason to organize Western forces against the Russians. The Russians were trying at the time as an aggressor. They were an aggressor, no doubt, under Stalin, trying to take and solidify their grasp on Eastern Europe. They wanted to take and make that part of the Soviet Union. We didn't stand for that. And this is where I'm a Reagan guy. No, you need to give it up. Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down. So that was the response. NATO inherently is a defensive organization. It's supposed to be there to defend the equities of our allies. It's not meant to be an organization that's expeditionary, although they were in Afghanistan. We turned Afghanistan over to them in 2004, the war anyway. And then they're not supposed to be an offensive a military organization. They're not. So what has happened is the likes of the Kagans and Newlands and others, they're trying to reform NATO into something that can do offensive operations to destabilize. Inherently, NATO was supposed to be a passive military organization that was prepared to respond. Now they're trying to shape it into a sword that'll cut and create conditions for offense, which is dangerous. So I would, this is a long way of answering your question, but I think we've changed the very essence and understanding of what NATO is for purposes of 21st century politics, globalist politics. Some have said that NATO is become the globalists' army, which I think in many ways it's true. Its nature has changed from the DNA which created back in the 1950s. So,
What happens if the U.S. awakens the Russian bear?
we already have. The question becomes, what do the Russians want to do?
Okay, what will the Russians do if we awake? Since we have awakened the Russian bear, will they?
They're already doing it.
Will they attack those American troops in Poland
No.
and Romania? Does that trigger Article 5 of NATO? Does Joe Biden want this war to get reelected? Are they going to attack Miami or Boston or New York?
Yes, the Biden administration wants them to attack in Poland. No, the Russians aren't going to do it. The Russians are pretty smart about this.